There we go. Welcome to Season 1, Episode 11 of Weekend Side Quest. Today I'm working on building a small toy plane for my son. Now, he actually designed this a while ago for one of his friends at school. I guess his friends wanted him to make a plane. He did it in, I think it was Tinkercad, because Tinkercad's free, or at least his school has access to use it. Something they do now in middle school. It's what's kind of neat. Is just make kids have a course on design and learning how to use CAD tools because I mean obviously I'm old, but they didn't exist when I was little. But I feel like even if they did, we probably wouldn't have had a course on it because we were just about fundamentals back in the 90s and 80s. So he made this tool. And I guess he heard I had a printer. He wanted me to print his plane. So the only way, like I use FreeCAD. I don't have Tinkercad, and also his Tinkercad. It's not shareable or something. It's in his workspace, but he was able to export an STL. So the STL is just like a PDF print of his picture of his plane in blow apart mode. Now, this isn't exactly printable on its own because it's just a picture. So my first quest was going through FreeCAD, and I tried to trace every bit of the plane and kept rotating it and then making individual parts and bodies for all the pieces of his plane. But I tried as well to not change it or be different from how he designed it because I wanted it to be his design. Now there's a couple differences I had to do, like just one piece here for the body, but to make an assembly of it, I have to have like something I could have a lid. So I just cut a slot here, put the wing in through a pocket. But then how do you hook that on? Well, I had some M3 bolts and I had some small those heat set threaded inserts. So that made sense to me because having them in it just looks like a good fit, and plus it makes the plane look more bolty, which is like fun if it looks more like a real plane, I guess. I was really quite impressed with his propeller design. He drew a propeller with a shaft and it had a hole. He had this little plastic stopper, I guess it would glue in, and then he had these like square pegs sticking out, and then on the front of his plane he had holes that matched those. So I guess this would work well if it was glue, but I didn't feel like a propeller that turns would be probably get a lot of use. It might break, so I wanted to make this like fixable. So in this case, again, I used M3 bolts with threaded inserts and pockets, and then on the back of the propeller, I printed the little disc he did, but I just put like a small M2 and a small threaded insert inside the shaft, the propeller. And lastly, well, second lastly, I decided it needed a stand because his doesn't really have landing gear on it, and I didn't want to add any because that's changing his design. And then, oh, great, I just drew a stand. And then the way he has his rockets or the missiles, he shows a couple on the plane and a couple loose, and there's four in total. But I didn't want to just make some on the plane and some loose, so I designed little. Oh, I shouldn't should have showed it here. But there's little clippies, like it looks like a Lego fig hand that just basically holds the rocket, and it springs and spring clips, so it lets the rocket come off the plane. So you could take all the rockets off, and you could fly them and put them back on the plane. So enough design. Here's basically printing the rockets vertically, no supports. Actually, sorry, no, these did have supports underneath the fins. The first time I didn't use supports on the backs, the rockets broke. These are those little clips, like I described, to hold the rocket missiles. The wing was challenging. Now, I guess he designed this in January, and the first time I built a plane for him, and he liked it, but I printed the wing horizontally, and it kind of had some weird artifacts and warpiness. So this time I'm printing it vertically, and it looks like it turned out perfectly. Now, I guess what I'm doing this time, this weekend, is I printed one entire plane before, basically this model, and there was a couple bugs and problems, like holes weren't padded properly, so I had to use knives and drills to fix it. Um, so I printed it for him, but then his brother wanted to have a plane as well, so here I am printing a second plane, and this time I thought I'm going to take pictures and explain how I did it. Here, I decided for supports for vertical, it's going to need some kind of support, and I was just playing around in the slicer using organic supports, and I'm really excited to see this because it looks like a tree root, and it's basically the only part that's touching the wing is the parts where they have the slots cut out for the missile clips to go into. So it came off really easy and didn't make any visible artifacts on the bottom of the wing. This is the front of the plane, where the threaded inserts have been put in, where the bolts will go to hold the cowl or the engine or the propeller part onto the plane. This is the body with the threaded inserts being put in, and of course I just use my soldering iron, so it's not perfectly vertical, and plus the body of the plane's round, so getting these threaded inserts to be aligned properly was challenging. I just kept heating them and slightly bumping them with the tweezers with the bolts put into the insert. Seemed to work out pretty well. This is the plane with the wing clipped into the top part and the top part bolted on. And these are the clips for the missiles. I basically cut little pockets in the bottom of the wing this time. The first time I printed the plane I didn't, and I had to use a Sharpie and a ruler and manually kind of guess where to put them. So this time was a much more quicker and consistent assembly. And then there's the propeller being put together, the small M2 threaded insert and the backing cap, and the cutout in the back of the engine cowl. And I found it's kind of, I guess it looks good in CAD, but getting the propeller on is actually challenging because the bolt heads don't go around it. You got to kind of put the bolts in first, then put the propeller on, and then use the hex wrench to tighten the bolts onto the body. Because the hex wrench does fit, but the bolt heads don't. And there's the plane, all assembled, missiles on. I think I've made this before I printed the stand, but it basically looks the same as it does here on the stand. From what I can tell, the kids are super happy. They like having a plane each because now they can play fighting. I hope they don't actually try to fly it because it doesn't fly. It's basically a model or a toy, and it's probably super breakable. It's all just regular PLA. But thank you for watching.